Good morning, everyone. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com, live at the Chrysler Center here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, following number 3 Purdue's 82-58 loss at Michigan. That is not a typo, nor would it be a typo since it's a spoken word and not something written or typed. Obviously, a very one-sided and disappointing loss for Purdue. This is your wrap video following this game. It is brought to you by our friends at the Purdue Club Hotel and the 811 Bistro. Thank you, as always, to them for their support. You know, if you've watched my videos over the years, God bless you. If you've read my stuff over the years, God bless you. You know how much I hate the term perfect storm. I just feel like it's overused. It's a cliche. It's bad. It's borderline logical in a lot of contexts. But there are times where it really clicks because there's no other real word for it in our modern day lexicon. That movie has become an actual part of our vocabulary because there's no real word for when everything happens at once going against you or something. There's no real word for that doesn't involve profanity, thus disqualifying it for use in these videos. So I guess I have to use the term perfect storm. This was a perfect storm. This was the perfect crossing of the streams in Ghostbusters of everything that can get Purdue beat, everything that has gotten Purdue beat, and a torrid three-point shooting outburst from the other team. This was just a total malfunction on Purdue's part, but also just a total convergence of events. I mean, it was just, a wise man once told me when I was young, some words of wisdom. I've mentioned this before in these videos. It's just, sometimes you just get your ass kicked, and there's, not always something you can do about it. Sometimes these things just kind of happen. I'm not trying to be reductive about what just happened here tonight, but, I mean, it kind of does happen sometimes. College basketball is a very funny game that way. But obviously not Purdue's finest hour here. Really an incomprehensible margin. But that being said, everything that kind of led up to it, as I said before, it was this convergence of everything that has gotten Purdue beat. And this was Purdue's third court storming of the year. And everything that can get Purdue beat, all of the things that are this team's soft underbelly, so to speak, they were all laid bare tonight. Purdue is not a very good defensive team. I think we can all agree on that. I just literally yesterday wrote something kind of explaining off Purdue's metrics that people have been talking a lot about lately, and I think everything basically came to bear tonight. That being said, this was a 9-point game at halftime. This game wasn't over at halftime, but it was over when Michigan made 9 of 13 threes, the sort of volcanic three-point shooting run that sometimes Purdue has been able to weather. I'm thinking of the final 10 minutes at Penn State. Purdue won that game anyway. There have been some instances where Purdue has weathered that kind of thing. There have been other instances, Ron Harper, Robert Finney, where Purdue hasn't been able to get through something like that. 9 of 13 is just, I mean, that's just, the proverbial NBA Jam kind of thing. But that's kind of modern basketball for you. It's like what the three-pointer has made basketball. It's like running into the wrong pitching staff in the Major League Baseball playoffs. It's like running into Joe Burrow in any sort of playoff situation in football. When you just run into somebody on the wrong night, you have a bad night maybe, crazy stuff happens. I'm not saying this was crazy because Michigan beat the tar out of Purdue today. This wasn't a fluke. There was nothing about this that wasn't anything short of just simply one team being, markedly better than the other. But Purdue, when you rely on the three-pointer as much as Purdue does, and I'm not saying, Purdue has more balance than any team in the country, but nevertheless, the three-pointer is a huge part of what they do. When you rely on the three-pointer as much as you do to overcome other deficiencies in your overall package, this is what you kind of expose yourself to sometimes. You go 4 of 18, and that's even kind of a deceiving number because Caleb first made a 3 with 2 minutes to go. Not that that doesn't count. I'm just saying that that was an irrelevant shot that was made at the end there to clean up the numbers a little bit. This is what you get exposed to sometimes, is you take away your margin for error when you're not very good defensively, when you turn the ball over, when you give up offensive rebounds. And, so often this season Purdue's just been able to drown that stuff out with three-pointers or just with offense in general. And when the three-pointer is such a big part of what you do expose yourself to this kind of thing where you don't shoot well, but then on the other side of the coin, thus that perfect storm, it's also the great equalizer for anybody else. So anybody can get hot at the right time, you know what I mean? And Michigan obviously did. And, part of that had to do with Purdue turning the ball over. Part of that had to do with, Michigan getting out in transition, which has to do with, failings on Purdue's offense's part generally. Again, just a perfect storm. I don't have a different word than that. So like the Avengers to Thanos, my own failures have brought me back to a perfect storm. Anyway, that's kind of, just obviously the best way to explain this off is that just everything that, Purdue has been struggling with this season, everything that it's been able to overcome, everything that it's been able to just kind of slap a coat of paint over every now and then by scoring 20 more points than their opponent or whatever. I don't know what that means. It all converged tonight. And that's how 82-58 happens against a team that 5 days ago, you only beat by 6, but really that was more like a 12 to 15 point kind of win. I think Michigan deserves a lot of credit for apparently tweaking some things, from an offensive perspective to really give Purdue problems. But Purdue is has not been very good against the dribble, as I've said over and over again this year. They have to be really solid on offense to give their defense their best chance, and when they turn the ball over 14 times, and a bunch of those came in the first half, they kind of got what was coming to them in that regard too. But their whole defensive approach, their structure, their system, their mentality is geared toward protecting the paint. And they could not do that in this game. Devontae Jones really played well for Michigan, really cut Purdue up. They really struggled with Michigan's ball screen stuff. Hunter Dickinson, after what he did in Mackey Arena, still gets open for a couple of threes. Purdue a few times seemed to me like textbook situations where Purdue would double the post. They didn't double. I don't think that's game plan stuff. I think that's simply, concentration and preparation stuff on Purdue's part. Just a total, I can't think of a better word than total malfunction. I think pretty much everything that could have gone wrong for Purdue tonight went wrong, and everything that could have gone right for the most part for Michigan went right. And, this is what college basketball is. This is why college basketball is so interesting, is because anything's on the table almost all the time. 16s, I shouldn't say this because I think only one 16's ever won in the NCAA tournament, but this is why we love the NCAA tournament. Crazy things happen. Again, I'm not saying that this was a crazy thing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying that what we expect games to be and what they turn out to be are often very, very different things in a game played by 18 to 22-year-old males, the definition of the most combustible commodity on earth. I said 18 to 22 years old. I forgot about Illinois. 23 to 24-year-olds. Purdue shouldn't play Illinois anymore because after they play Illinois, and I don't know if there's any causation to this or not, but it's taken something out of them because they started well at Indiana after winning that double overtime game in Champaign. Couldn't sustain it, fell off a cliff with about 10 minutes to go in that first half. Today, they get their best win of the year. They're on the mountaintop at the top of the national conversation on Tuesday night, and then you turn around 2 days later, you come here, and it's the exact opposite. College basketball will humble you. College basketball will surprise you. College basketball is the most interesting game in the world for my money because you come to a game like this, Purdue's won 6 in a row. Purdue looks like the best team in the country, and not only do they get beat, but they get beat. Anything is possible at all times in college basketball. That is what makes it so fascinating. I know that is very little consolation for Purdue fans today who are licking their wounds over what just happened to their team, a team that I think is still really good. I don't think this really changes anything other than, shining a big spotlight on everything that Purdue has to be better at, has to take as seriously as possible, has to be hyper aware of at all times. The turnover thing, the offensive rebounding, the defensive rebounding that allows offensive rebounding, I think you know what I mean. Those are things that even when Purdue's doing well with them, Purdue has to remain hyper aware of them at all times. And that did not happen tonight. Both areas lapsed. That led to 25 Michigan points in this game. Purdue would not have won if not for those things, I don't think. But I think 25 points is a lot of points. Not to mention all the intangible stuff that goes along with all those extra opportunities Michigan got, all the extra time Purdue had to spend defending, all of that stuff. Purdue's got to clean that stuff up. You're never going to be perfect in those areas. I'm sitting here quoting 25 points. That's never going to be zero. But it also shouldn't be 25 either. As poor as Purdue was from a defensive perspective tonight, a lot more went into it than just poor defense and uncharacteristically inaccurate shooting. All of this being said, there were some really bizarre circumstances about this game, and it's really hard for me to even mention any of this stuff without it sounding like excuses. I'm not making excuses for Purdue, but I think, for the record, I think some of this stuff, ought to be documented. This was a really difficult position to be in for both of these teams, playing the same team twice in the span of 5 days. Purdue is in the middle of a really grueling stretch where, again, everything I say here is going to sound like an excuse, so don't yell at me. I know people love to scream the word excuses, and when they're mad, the difference between an excuse and a reason is simply the anger of the beholder. But this was a really tough spot to be in for both of these teams, playing each other twice in the span of 5 days. This was a really difficult position for Purdue to be in, playing all these games in succession. They've not had a day off in forever. Obviously, Michigan just came back from Penn State, too, so it's not like Purdue was unique in this regard, but Purdue was coming off a hell of a visceral, emotional win over Illinois. You turn around, you have to go back on the road. Just a really difficult position to be in, for Purdue especially, I think. Had this game been played in January, I think it goes without saying this unfolds very differently, because what happened was Michigan's COVID shutdown, and let's review how much COVID has affected the Purdue-Michigan series here the last 2 years. I'm not saying Purdue would have won in Mackey Arena last year. I doubt they would have, but I think losing Sasha Stefanovic to his positive test basically right on top of that game gave them no chance to win that game. This game gets rescheduled from January when Michigan was broken. Purdue would have come up here, and Purdue would have, I'm quite certain Purdue would have won that game at that time. I think that bought Michigan time to figure some things out with all their youth to kind of get better, and that's just kind of the breaks of it. The Big Ten was right to withdraw its forfeiture policy in situations like that, because you had to have a full season this year. You had to give legitimate integrity to the finality of the Big Ten standings, to the Big Ten champion, all of that stuff. So I'm not saying that game should have been a forfeit. I'm also not saying that Michigan should have played when it didn't. We can only take them at their word. They didn't have enough players to play back then. But that's just the reality of the situation that put this in a really, really unique set of circumstances here. That's not why Purdue lost. Purdue lost for all the reasons that I spent about 8 minutes talking about earlier, that perfect storm, if you will. But I just think a lot of the circumstances surrounding this game also need to be mentioned for the record, because they are part of the story. Whether or not they're the biggest part of the story, they're not. But they are part of the story. But the bigger part of the story is Purdue was really poor on defense tonight. Purdue shot really poorly. And when those two things combine, everything that's been covering up a lot of your shortcomings for most of the season really comes to bear. And, Purdue has to Has to get better because of this. I know saying that stuff in the middle of February kind of rings hollow, but Purdue's still good. Purdue's still really good. Purdue's obviously got Maryland on Sunday. Maryland gave up about 200 points to Iowa on their home floor tonight. Purdue has to get better because of this. It's unfortunate for Purdue to give ground in the Big Ten race right after you'd pulled even with everybody, but it's not like everybody else isn't going to lose games the rest of the year. That's kind of the nature of the Big Ten. But Purdue is probably going to need some help now. Long season to go. Everybody's got at least a half dozen games left or whatever it is, but just a really disappointing loss and effort for Purdue here tonight. I don't know how else to say it other than by making this facial expression. But anyway, that was obnoxious. Anyway, so from Chrysler Center here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, following Purdue's 82-58 loss to Michigan. This is Brian Neubert from goldenblack.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. And thank you for processing our materials. However it is you process our materials, process. I just slurred my pronunciation again. It is 1:51 in the morning, so you'll have to excuse me for that. Thank you to the Purdue Club Hotel and the 811 Bistro for your support. We appreciate it very much. And I'll talk to you guys again on Sunday following Purdue's game against Maryland. There's actually two days between games this time. That's pretty novel. So, thanks everybody.